Her life had never been gentle, but now it carried a weight deeper than survival alone. As a black maid, she moved through each day quietly, her presence almost invisible in the grand spaces she cleaned. Hard work had always been her shield against the world, yet even that could not protect her from fate. The child growing inside her was both her greatest fear and her strongest reason to keep going. Pregnancy did not soften her struggles. It magnified them. Every step felt heavier, every breath more deliberate. Yet she continued with unwavering discipline. She hid her exhaustion behind calm movements and her worries behind silence, knowing that sympathy was rare and judgment was quick. Society had never offered her room for mistakes, and now she carried the responsibility of another life while standing alone. Despite the fear, a quiet determination lived within her. The unborn child became her source of strength, a promise that her life could hold meaning beyond hardship. Though love had never been kind to her before, hope still lingered deep in her heart, fragile, unspoken, but alive, waiting for a miracle she never believed would come. He had built his life on control, discipline, and absolute certainty. As a Korean CEO, his world revolved around boardrooms, contracts, and carefully calculated decisions. Every hour of his day was planned, every emotion kept firmly in check. Love was not something he allowed space for. It was unpredictable, unnecessary, and capable of weakening even the strongest men. He believed success required distance, not attachment. From a young age, he had been taught that feelings were liabilities. Trust made people careless, and care led to loss. He learned to rely only on himself, shaping a personality that appeared cold, confident, and untouchable. Those around him admired his authority and feared his silence, mistaking his emotional restraint for strength. Few understood that beneath his composed exterior was a man who had simply learned how to survive without relying on anyone. Despite his wealth and influence, his life felt strangely empty. His home was immaculate but lifeless, filled with luxury that brought no comfort. Relationships came and went without leaving a mark, never touching the part of him he kept guarded. He convinced himself that this emptiness was the price of ambition, that fulfillment was overrated and solitude was safer. He never imagined that his carefully constructed world could be altered by something as fragile as affection. Love was never part of his future, never something he searched for or expected to find. Yet without realizing it, his certainty was already beginning to crack, preparing him for a connection that would challenge everything he believed about strength, control, and the meaning of his success. Their lives began to intertwine in ways neither of them expected. What started as a quiet professional connection slowly carried emotional weight, shaped by shared silence and unspoken understanding. She continued her duties with care and dignity, her movements gentle, her strength evident despite the burden she carried. Her pregnancy added a layer of vulnerability to her presence, yet it also revealed a resilience that was impossible to ignore. He noticed the change before he understood its meaning. The woman who moved through his world without asking for attention began to occupy his thoughts. Her calm endurance, the way she carried responsibility without complaint, stirred something unfamiliar within him. He became more aware of her well-being, not out of obligation, but out of a concern that felt instinctive and deeply personal as time passed. Her quiet presence began to soften the rigid structure of his life. The distance he maintained from others slowly weakened, replaced by a growing awareness of her struggles and strength. Without realizing it, he started to see her not as someone defined by her position, but as a woman carrying both life and pain with remarkable grace. In that growing connection, something fragile and powerful took root, setting the foundation for a bond neither of them could turn away from. Circumstances slowly tied their lives together in ways neither of them had anticipated. What began as responsibility grew heavier with each passing day, shaped by concern, protection, and the quiet reality of her condition. The weight she carried was not only physical but emotional, filled with fear about the future and doubts about her place in his world. She moved carefully, aware that her situation could change everything, uncertain whether she was allowed to hope. For him, the bond challenged the foundations of his carefully controlled life. He was used to clear boundaries and unquestioned authority, yet this connection refused to stay within rules. her vulnerability awakened a sense of duty that went beyond obligation, pulling him closer even as he tried to maintain distance. He found himself paying attention to her comfort, her health, and her emotional state in ways that surprised him. As their lives intertwined, trust began to form quietly. She sensed that his concern was genuine, not driven by pity or expectation. He, in turn, recognized her strength in carrying so much uncertainty with grace. What bound them was not yet love, but something just as powerful. A shared responsibility that slowly deepened into emotional attachment, setting the stage for feelings neither of them could ignore for long. What began as responsibility slowly transformed into something far deeper, something neither of them could fully ignore anymore. His concern for her went beyond duty, growing into a constant awareness of her presence, her emotions, and the life she carried within her. The strength he once valued above all else started to feel incomplete without the tenderness he now felt toward her. Protecting her was no longer just about control or reputation. It became instinctive, rooted in care that surfaced naturally. For her, love arrived quietly but powerfully. She had never expected affection, especially in a world where she had always been invisible. Carrying a child had already changed her perspective on life, making her more protective, more aware of vulnerability. His steady presence offered reassurance she had never known, and slowly, fear gave way to trust. She allowed herself to believe that perhaps love did not always come with loss. The connection between them deepened without words or demands. It was built on patience, understanding, and shared silence rather than promises. What they felt could no longer be denied or hidden. Love, once resisted and feared, claimed its place between them, reshaping their lives and proving that even the most guarded hearts can open when met with sincerity and compassion. What began as fear and uncertainty slowly transformed into something steady and life-giving. The weight she carried, both emotionally and physically, no longer felt like a burden she had to face alone. For the first time, her future was not defined by survival or sacrifice, but by the possibility of care, stability, and belonging. The pregnancy that once filled her with quiet anxiety became a symbol of hope, representing not just new life, but a second chance she never believed she would be given. For him, loving her reshaped everything he understood about responsibility and strength. He no longer viewed protection as control or obligation, but as partnership and commitment. Her resilience, her patience, and her unwavering dignity awakened a tenderness within him that success had never touched. In choosing to stand beside her fully, he embraced a future that demanded emotional presence rather than authority. Together, they began to build a life rooted in trust and mutual respect. The walls that once separated their worlds dissolved, replaced by a shared understanding that love could exist even in the most unlikely circumstances. What they found in each other was not perfection, but healing, a love strong enough to carry the past, embrace the present, and welcome the future with quiet courage and unwavering devotion. As time passed, love grew into something steady and undeniable, reshaping both of their lives in ways neither had anticipated. What began as quiet care evolved into a deep bond rooted in trust, responsibility, and emotional commitment. He no longer saw her through the lens of social roles or circumstances. She became the person who grounded him, softened his ambition, and gave meaning to everything he had built. The power he once carried so effortlessly now felt secondary to the life they were protecting together. For her, love brought a transformation just as profound. The fear that had once defined her days slowly loosened its grip. She learned to stand with confidence, not because her struggles had vanished, but because she was no longer facing them alone. The future, once uncertain and heavy with doubt, began to take shape with warmth and possibility. The child she carried became a symbol of hope rather than fear, binding her to a life she had never imagined she could claim. Together, they created a world shaped by understanding rather than control, by partnership rather than silence. Their love did not erase the past, but it redefined it, turning pain into strength and isolation into belonging. What they found in each other was more than romance, it was a shared purpose that gave their lives new direction, proving that love, when rooted in respect and compassion, had the power to change everything. Love entered their lives quietly but reshaped everything it touched. What began as fear and uncertainty slowly transformed into trust, then into a bond strong enough to withstand judgment, doubt, and the weight of their pasts. For her, love was no longer a fragile hope she kept hidden. It became a living force that gave her courage during moments of vulnerability. Carrying new life within her intensified every emotion, making her more aware of how deeply she had come to care, not just for the future she held, but for the man who stood beside her through it all. For him, love demanded growth he had never anticipated. The disciplined control that once defined him softened into patience and understanding. He learned to listen rather than command, to protect without overpowering, and to support without conditions. Loving her meant accepting responsibility not only for her well-being, but for the life growing between them. This realization reshaped his priorities, grounding his ambition in something far more meaningful than success alone. Together, they built a future rooted in acceptance rather than fear. Her strength and resilience balanced his power and stability, creating a partnership defined by mutual respect. Love no longer felt like a risk to avoid, but a foundation upon which everything else could stand. What once seemed impossible became real, a shared destiny born from compassion, devotion, and a love strong enough to change both of their lives forever. What she had once believed was impossible slowly became her reality. The fear that had followed her for most of her life began to loosen its grip, replaced by a quiet certainty that she was no longer alone. Carrying new life within her had once felt like a burden she would have to bear in silence, but now it became a symbol of hope and renewal. She started to see her future not as something to survive, but as something she was finally allowed to embrace. His love reshaped the path ahead of her. Where there had once been insecurity and doubt, there was now reassurance and steadiness. He did not see her pregnancy as a complication or a weakness, but as part of who she was and who she was becoming. That acceptance gave her strength she never knew she possessed, allowing her to stand taller and believe that her life could be defined by dignity rather than struggle. For him, loving her changed the meaning of responsibility and success. Protecting her and the life she carried became more important than reputation or control. The future he envisioned now included warmth, patience, and emotional connection, things he had once ignored. Together, they formed a bond rooted in trust and devotion, creating a future where love was no longer silent or hidden, but openly cherished.